You're settling a gambling debt. With me.
The candles in Lord Sterling's study had burned low by the time Genevieve understood what was happening. She had been summoned at midnight. That alone should have warned her. Her father stood behind his desk, red-faced, avoiding her eyes. 3 men she didn't recognize sat in the chairs opposite him. One held a ledger. Another held a glass of brandy. The third held nothing, just watched her the way men watch livestock at Market Genevieve. Her father cleared his throat. You will accompany Lord Harwick to Whitmore Estate tomorrow morning. I don't understand. You don't need to. But she looked at the ledger. She could read. Her mother had made certain of that, quietly before she died. The numbers were plain. Her father owed a debt he couldn't pay. The debt had a solution. The solution had her name on it. You're settling a gambling debt, she said. With me. Lord Sterling slammed his palm on the desk. You will do as you're told. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She stood very still and felt something inside her go cold and hard, like iron cooling in a mold. By morning, her trunk was packed, not by servants, but by herself. She folded her mother's locket into her breast pocket, tucked her 2 books beneath her spare gowns. She had nothing else worth carrying. The carriage arrived before sunrise. She stepped in without looking back. Lord Sterling didn't come outside to watch her leave. That was the part she would remember longest. Not the debt, not the ledger, not the strange men in the chairs, just the empty doorway. The road to Whitmore Estate stretched north, through frost-grey fields that seemed to belong to no one. Lord Harwick, seated across from her, said nothing for the first hour. Then, the Duke is not a warm man. I didn't expect warmth. He is fair, Harwick added, as if fairness were a consolation prize. She looked out the window. The fields rolled past, bare and wide and indifferent, fair. She turned the word over. Her father had been charming, and look where that had left her. She would take fair. Whitmore Estate appeared at the crest of a hill. Stone walls, iron gates, windows that caught no light. It looked exactly like what it was. A house that had forgotten how to be a home. The carriage stopped. The doors opened, and for the first time, Genevieve Sterling stepped out of her father's world and into something she didn't yet have a name for. She held her chin level. Her hands were steady. Whatever came next, she would not be caught unprepared. Duke Damien Whitmore did not come to greet her. A housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, stiff-backed, efficient, led Genevieve through stone corridors that smelled of cold ash and beeswax. Every surface was clean. Every room was ordered. Nothing was warm. The Duke will receive you in the study, Mrs. Holloway said. Speak only when spoken to. Answer directly. He despises theatrics. Noted. The housekeeper glanced sideways at her. Something shifted slightly in the woman's expression. Not approval, not yet. Just recalibration. The study door opened. Damien Whitmore stood at the window with his back to her. He was taller than she expected. Broader. He wore no coat, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled, like a man who had already been working for hours. Which, she would later learn, he had. He didn't turn around immediately. She didn't fidget. Finally, he spoke. You can read? Yes. Write? Yes. Manage household accounts? I can learn anything you put in front of me. He turned then. His face was angular, unreadable, dark eyes that moved over her once. Not with desire, but with the same assessment she might give a contract before signing it. Lord Harwick tells me your father owed a considerable sum. My father owes everyone a considerable sum. A pause. Something moved briefly behind his eyes. I didn't purchase you, he said. I want that stated plainly. I settled a debt owed to me using an arrangement your father proposed. I find the arrangement distasteful, but you are here, and I am not in the habit of turning people into the cold. Genevieve said nothing. You will have your own room, your own wage, Small, but real. You will assist Mrs. Holloway with correspondence and household management. You answer to no one in this house in any other capacity. Are we understood? Completely. He nodded once. Done. One more thing, she said. He stopped. I am not a debt settlement. I understand the arrangement, but I would prefer, going forward, that we both pretend the arrangement was something more dignified than it was. It will make working together easier. The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if she'd miscalculated. Then, very slightly, the corner of his mouth moved. Agreed, he said. You may go. The estate had 3 sons, or it had, once. Mrs. Holloway told her on the 3rd morning, without sentiment, the Duchess had died 4 years ago, of fever. The youngest boy, Thomas, had followed her 6 months later. The 2 surviving sons, Edmund and Charles, were away at school and returned only at Christmas. Damien Whitmore had run the estate alone since then. No parties, no visitors, no softness of any kind. He locked the east wing, Mrs. Holloway said, handing Genevieve a stack of unopened correspondence. The Duchess's rooms. No one goes in. Genevieve looked at the letters. Months of them. Some with urgent seals. He hasn't been reading his post. He reads what concerns the land. Some of these concern the land. Mrs. Holloway looked at her. Then perhaps you should tell him. She knocked on his study door that evening. Entered when he called it. She placed 6 letters on his desk, sorted by urgency. With a brief summary she had written on a separate sheet. Dates, senders, required actions. He looked at the sheet. Then at her. I didn't ask for this. No, she said, but your northern tenant's drainage dispute has been escalating for 4 months, and another winter without. Resolution will cost you more than the legal fee. I flagged it at the top. He picked up the sheet. Read it, set it down. Sit, he said. She sat. For the next hour, he worked through the letters while she answered his questions, cross-referenced figures from the account books she'd already begun reviewing, and suggested twice, carefully, where he might have been overcharged by suppliers. He caught the second one himself before she finished the sentence. You're quick, he said. Not a compliment exactly, more like a fact he was recording. My mother taught me, she said. She believed a woman with a sharp mind had something no one could take from her. He was quiet for a moment. She was right, he said simply, and returned to the letters. It wasn't warmth, not yet. But that evening, when Genevieve returned to her room, she found a fire already lit. Not by Mrs. Holloway, whose duties ended at supper. She stood in front of it for a long moment. Then she sat, opened her book, and for the first time since she'd left her father's house, she felt something that wasn't fear and wasn't grief. Just the quiet, tentative shape of safety. She didn't trust it yet, but she didn't push it away either. Winter softened into early spring, and Genevieve learned the shape of Whitmore Estate the way you learn a language, slowly, then all at once. She learned which floorboards creaked before dawn when Damien walked the halls unable to sleep. She learned that Mrs. Holloway took her tea without sugar, but would never admit to wanting a biscuit with it. She learned that the stable boy, Peter, was 12 years old and teaching himself to read using feed sack labels, because no one had thought to offer him anything better. She started teaching Peter on Tuesday mornings. She didn't ask permission. The correspondence work expanded naturally. What began as sorting letters became drafting replies. Drafting replies became sitting in on meetings with the estate steward. Sitting in became speaking up when the numbers didn't align, which was more often than anyone had noticed before she arrived. Damien never told her to stop. He simply made room. One morning she arrived at the study to find a second chair had been placed at his desk, a smaller writing surface beside his, an extra ink pot. No explanation, no ceremony. She sat down and got to work. The household noticed Mrs. Holloway, who had assessed her with cool suspicion in the first week, began leaving her morning tea without being asked. The cook, a broad woman named Agnes, started consulting her about supply orders. The groundskeeper tipped his hat. She hadn't sought any of it. She'd simply done what needed doing, consistently, without complaint. And people, she discovered, respond to consistency the way cold ground responds to sun, slowly, but completely. Edmund and Charles came home for Easter. She had prepared for this, 2 boys, 10 and 13, who had grown up in a house carved hollow by grief. She expected suspicion, maybe hostility. Edmund, the elder, walked into the dining room, looked at her, and said, "Father said you reorganized the account ledgers." "I did. He said you found a supplier overcharging us for grain." 2 suppliers, actually. Edmund considered this. "Good," he said, and sat down. Charles, the younger, was quieter, watchful in the way children are when they've learned that adults disappear without warning. He didn't speak to her directly for 3 days. Then he appeared at the doorway of the study while she was working and held out a folded piece of paper, a drawing, rough, boyish, the estate, the fields, a figure at a window with dark hair, her. She looked up at him. "It's not very good," he said quickly. "It's wonderful," she said, and meant it. He turned red and vanished down the corridor, but after that he sat near her at dinner, and after dinner he started bringing her his lesson books. She started helping him with Latin. The town was slower. Crestmore village sat 2 miles from the estate gates, and it had opinions. Genevieve felt them every time she accompanied Mrs. Holloway to the market, the looks that moved between curiosity and judgment, the whispers that stopped a half-second too late. Lady Ashford, the banker's wife, was the worst of them. She had a smile like a door closing. "Miss Sterling," she said one morning at the linen merchant's, "how extraordinary that you've settled in so comfortably at Whitmore." "The Duke runs an efficient household," Genevieve replied. "It wasn't difficult to find my place in it." "Indeed." Lady Ashford's eyes moved over her once. "And what place is that precisely?" Genevieve held her gaze, calm, unhurried. "The useful one," she said, and turned back to the linens. Mrs. Holloway, standing nearby, made a sound that might, in a less composed woman, have been a laugh. She found Damien at the fence line one evening, watching the northern fields. She stood beside him without speaking. They developed a habit of this. Comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't demand filling. "Charles showed me the drawing," he said eventually. "He has a good eye. He hasn't drawn anything since his mother died." A pause. "I didn't know he'd started." Again, she said nothing. "Let it settle." "You've been teaching Peter to read," he said. "Yes, I should have thought of that. You had other things to carry." He was quiet for a moment. The fields stretched gold and wide in the late light. "This place was very dark," he said finally, "before. It wasn't a thank you. Damien Whitmore didn't deal in thank yous, but she understood it for what it was, an acknowledgement, an opening. It has good bones," she said. "It just needed tending." He looked at her then, really looked, not the assessing glance of their first meeting, but something slower and more complicated. He looked away first. That night she wrote a letter to no one. Just words in her journal, the habit her mother had given her. "I think I am becoming necessary here, not as a debt, not as an arrangement, as myself. That is something I did not expect to feel again." She closed the journal, blew out the candle. Outside, the estate was quiet. But it was the quiet of something alive, not something empty. There was a difference. She knew it now. It started with a shirt. Damien had torn the sleeve on a fence nail. A clean rip deep into the seam. He said nothing about it. Simply set it outside his door the next morning, the way he set everything he needed handled. Quietly, without making it a request. She mended it that afternoon. Neat, nearly invisible stitches, the way her mother had taught her. She returned it the same way, folded, outside the door, no note, no ceremony, but the following morning there was a small book on her writing table. No inscription, just a leather-bound collection of French poetry she had mentioned, once, briefly, 3 weeks ago, that she'd always wanted to read. She stood looking at it for a long moment. Then she sat down, opened it, and smiled at the page. The boys came home for the summer. Edmund was 13 now and had developed strong opinions about estate management that he delivered at dinner with great confidence and occasional accuracy. Damien listened to him seriously, corrected him without condescension, and twice. She noticed used Edmund's suggestions the following week without announcement. Edmund noticed too. He sat straighter after that. Charles had grown 2 inches and lost some of his watchfulness. He still brought her his lesson books, but now he also brought her questions about the estate, about London, about why the northern tenants paid different rates than the southern ones. Because of soil quality and water access, she told him. Better land, higher yield, higher rent. It's in the original land agreements from 1743. I can show you. He looked at her the way people look when a door they didn't know existed suddenly opens. Can you teach me to read the old agreements? I can teach you to read anything, she said. Agnes the cook had a sister in the village whose husband had lost work. Genevieve found out by accident, overheard, said nothing, then quietly suggested to Damien that the estate's winter woodcutting contract hadn't been renewed yet. He looked at her over his correspondence. Do you have someone in mind? Agnes might. He nodded once. Done. Agnes appeared at her doorway that evening, broad hands folded, expression fierce with the effort of not showing emotion. Thank you, she said, stiff, sincere. The estate needed the wood, Genevieve said simply. Agnes nodded sharply and left. But after that, the best portions at dinner appeared, without comment, on Genevieve's plate first. The evening it shifted, truly shifted, began with rain. A summer storm rolled in fast, and Charles had left his lesson books in the garden. Genevieve ran out without thinking, gathered them up, came back soaked, laughing slightly at her own impracticality. Damien was in the doorway. He said nothing, took off his coat, the good one, the formal one, and put it around her shoulders in one quiet motion. She looked up at him. He was close, closer than the arrangement between them had ever required. Thank you, she said. You'll ruin those books standing there, he said, and walked away. But his coat was warm, and it smelled like cedar and ink, and she stood in the doorway longer than strictly necessary. She found him in the east wing 3 nights later. The door was open, just barely. She had been passing, candle in hand, on her way to the library. She stopped. He was sitting in a chair in the Duchess's room, not touching anything. Just sitting. The room was preserved exactly as it must have been. Brushes on the vanity, a shawl on the chair back, a child's small shoe on the windowsill. Thomas's, she understood immediately. She didn't go in. But she didn't leave either. After a moment, without turning, he said, She would have liked you. Genevieve's breath caught. She had no patience for pretense, he continued. She said exactly what she meant. She taught Edmund to question everything and Charles to draw. A long pause. She would have said, I waited too long to open the post. A soft sound escaped Genevieve. Not quite a laugh, almost. She would have been right, she said gently. He was quiet for a long time. I know, he said. She left him there, because he needed the room, not a rescue. But she paused at the end of the corridor and pressed her hand flat against the cold wall and felt something large and complicated move through her chest. This man was not cold, he was grieving. There was an enormous difference. Summer turned. The boys went back to school. The house contracted again to its quieter self, just Damien, Genevieve, Mrs. Holloway, Agnes, and the rhythm they'd all built together without naming it. One evening, Damien looked up from his correspondence and said, without preamble, "I don't want you to feel that this—" He stopped. Started again. "Your situation here. I want you to know you are not here because of a debt." "I know that," she said. "Do you?" She met his eyes. "You lit the fire in my room on the second night, before you knew whether I was capable of anything. That told me what I needed to know." He held her gaze. Then he looked back down at his papers, but the corner of his mouth moved, and this time she saw it clearly. She returned to her French poetry. The rain came down outside. The fire crackled between them. Neither of them moved to leave. Lord Sterling arrived on a Tuesday. No letter, no warning. Just a carriage at the gate, and her father stepping out of it like a man who still believed he owned things he had long since forfeited. Genevieve saw him from the upstairs window. She set down her pen, breathed once, then walked downstairs. He looked worse than she remembered, thinner. The fine coat he wore had been mended badly at the collar. She could see it from across the entrance hall. His boots were expensive but old. A man performing solvency he no longer possessed. Genevieve, he smiled, the charming one. The one that had worked on creditors and house guests, and her mother once, a long time ago. "You look well, Father. I've come to see how you're getting on." He looked around the entrance hall, the high ceilings, the portraits, the stone staircase. Calculating. She could see him doing it. Impressive estate. The Duke has done well. "What do you want?" The smile flickered. "Can't a father visit his daughter? You don't make visits without purpose. You never have." He dropped the smile then, not out of honesty, but because it wasn't working. He moved to the drawing room without being invited. She followed. He sat. She didn't. "I've fallen into some difficulty," he said. "Temporary. A matter of a few outstanding debts. Nothing serious, but the timing is inconvenient. I thought, given your position here, a word to the Duke might—" "No," he blinked. "I haven't finished. You want me to use whatever standing I have in this house to secure you money or credit or intervention? The answer is no." His expression shifted, the charm stripped back to something harder underneath. "You are my daughter. I was your asset," she said. "You made that distinction very clearly. I did what was necessary. You sold me." Her voice stayed even, quiet. That was the thing he hadn't expected, that she wouldn't shout. "To settle a gambling debt. In the middle of the night. With 3 men I'd never met watching to make sure the transaction completed." The room was very still. "I have built something here," she continued, "not because of you. Despite you, and I will not let you attach yourself to it." Lord Sterling's face reddened. He stood. "You forget yourself. I am still your father. I have legal standing. You have nothing." The voice came from the doorway. Damien stood at the threshold, coat on, fully composed, as if he had been there for some time. His eyes were on Lord Sterling. They were not warm. "Your Grace." Lord Sterling straightened immediately, shifted register, charm engaged, hand extended. I heard what you were doing." Damien didn't take the hand, didn't move from the doorway. "You have no legal standing in this house. Your daughter is employed here under her own wage and her own name. She is not your property, your collateral, or your resource." Lord Sterling's hand dropped. "With respect, the original arrangement. The original arrangement settled a debt. It is settled. There is no arrangement remaining that involves you." A pause. Clean, final. "You will leave now." The silence in the room had weight. Lord Sterling looked at Genevieve. One last attempt, the wounded father expression. The thing that might have worked on the girl she used to be. It found nothing to grip. She looked back at him without anger, without grief, just clarity. He left. She heard the carriage wheels on the gravel. stood at the drawing-room window and watched until the gates closed behind him. Damien came to stand beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "How much did you hear?" she asked. "Enough. I handled it." "You did," he said. "I came because I wanted to, not because I thought you couldn't." She turned to look at him. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not the assessing look, not the composed Duke face. Something more unguarded, like a man who had been frightened and was only now allowing himself to know it. "Were you worried?" she asked. "Yes, just that, no qualification." She felt something move through her, warm and complicated, and too large to name in a drawing room on a Tuesday afternoon. "He won't stop," she said. "Men like him don't stop." "No," Damien agreed, "but men like him also understand consequence." He paused. "I've already written to my solicitor. Any debt Lord Sterling attempts to leverage against your name or your connection to this estate will be met. Legally, he will find that door closed before he reaches it." She stared at him. "When did you?" "This morning, when I saw the carriage at the gate. Before she'd come downstairs, before the confrontation." He had already been moving to protect her while she was still steadying her breath at the upstairs window. She didn't have words for that, so she said nothing. But she reached out, just briefly, and touched the back of his hand with her fingers. He went very still. She withdrew her hand, looked back at the window. "Thank you," she said quietly. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Come," Edmund wrote. "He has strong opinions about the spring planting schedule, and I need a second perspective before I respond." She almost laughed. "Almost. Of course he does," she said. And they walked back to the study together, shoulder to shoulder, through the quiet stone corridors of a house that was, unmistakably, irrevocably, becoming a home. The invitation came from Lady Ashford herself. A cream envelope, sealed in blue wax, addressed to Miss Genevieve Sterling, Whitmore Estate. Not the Duke's household, not staff, her name, her specifically. Mrs. Holloway delivered it with an expression that said everything she refused to say aloud. Genevieve opened it at the breakfast table. The Crestmore Autumn Assembly, an annual gathering of the county's notable families. Lady Ashford requested the pleasure of Miss Sterling's company. And the postscript noted with careful casualness, the Duke's, should he be available. Damien looked up from his coffee. "What is it?" She slid the invitation across the table. He read it, set it down. "Lady Ashford," he said, with the tone of a man identifying a weather pattern. "The same woman who asked me what my precise place was in your household. I remember." He picked up his coffee. "Do you want to go?" She considered it. "I want to walk into that room and give them nothing to pity." The corner of his mouth moved. "Then we'll go." She made her own dress. Not from poverty. Her wage had accumulated quietly over the months, more than she'd spent. She made it because she wanted to. Deep green wool, simply cut, with her mother's locket at her throat. She didn't want borrowed finery. She wanted to walk in as herself. Mrs. Holloway appeared in her doorway the evening before and looked at the dress laid out on the bed. She was quiet for a moment. "Your mother taught you well," she said finally. Coming from Mrs. Holloway, it was a standing ovation. The assembly hall was warm and loud and full of people who had spent months constructing opinions about Genevieve Sterling without ever speaking to her. She felt them the moment she walked in, the recalibration moving through the room like a current. She was on Damien's arm, which surprised them. She was composed, which unsettled them. She was not what they'd built in their heads, which confused them. Good. Lady Ashford approached within 5 minutes. Efficient Genevieve would give her that, Miss Sterling. The smile, that closing door smile. "How lovely, and your grace, what a pleasure." "Lady Ashford," Damien said, perfectly civil, perfectly cool. "I must say, Lady Ashford's eyes moved briefly over Genevieve's dress, searching for an angle. "You've settled into the county beautifully. The county has been generous," Genevieve said. "We were surprised, of course. When we first heard about the arrangement." A pause waited with implication. "Unusual circumstances." "Most interesting things begin unusually," Genevieve replied. "I find conventional beginnings rarely produce anything worth discussing." A beat of silence. Then Lady Ashford laughed, genuinely startled out of her script. "Well," she said, and for the first time the smile reached her eyes, "I suppose that's true." The banker, Mr. Ashford, cornered Damien near the fireplace. Genevieve watched from across the room while managing a conversation with two younger women who had started as curious and ended as genuinely warm. She saw the moment it happened. Ashford saying something, gesturing toward her, Damien responding with 3 words that made Ashford nod slowly, reassessing. She would ask him later what he'd said. She runs the estate's correspondence, account reviews, and tenant negotiations. Whitmore operates better with her than it ever did without her. Plain, factual, devastating in its simplicity. The shopkeeper's wife found her by the refreshment table, Mrs. Garrett, who had whispered loudly enough to be heard 6 months ago that it was shameful what the Duke had allowed into his house. She was a small woman who wore her righteousness like armor. She stood in front of Genevieve now and said, without preamble, "I owe you an apology." Genevieve waited. "I said unkind things, unfair things. I didn't know you." A pause. "My husband says you're the reason the grain dispute was finally settled. That the northern tenants kept their farms because someone at the estate actually read the land agreements." "The agreements supported their case," Genevieve said. "I just made sure the right people saw them." Mrs. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't have to do that. They're not your tenants. They're people," Genevieve said simply. "That was enough reason." Mrs. Garrett nodded, short, firm, the nod of a woman updating a firmly held position. "Well," she said, "I'm glad you're here." She walked away before either of them could make it sentimental. Genevieve turned back to the refreshment table and allowed herself one quiet, private moment of satisfaction. On the carriage ride home, Damien was silent for a while. Then, "You handled Lady Ashford better than I have in 11 years. She just needed someone to surprise her." He looked out the window. The night fields rolled past, silver under a half moon. "Mrs. Garrett spoke to you." "Yes. And?" She apologized. Genevieve paused. "I think she meant it." "She did," he said. "Margaret Garrett doesn't say things she doesn't mean. It's her one redeeming quality." Genevieve smiled at the window. The carriage moved through the dark. The estate gates appeared ahead, lanterns lit on either side, warm gold against the black tree line. She looked at them and felt it settle through her completely, for the first time without qualification, home. Not assigned, not arranged, not borrowed, hers. Damien's hand moved, just slightly, and covered hers where it rested on the seat between them. He didn't say anything, neither did she. The gates opened. The carriage rolled through. He asked her, on a Wednesday, no grand gesture, no orchestrated moment. Just the two of them in the study after supper, the fire low, papers spread between them the way they always were. The comfortable debris of a shared life that had built itself quietly, without announcement. He set down his pen. "I want to court you properly." She looked up. "I am aware," he continued, in the careful way he had when something mattered too much for carelessness, "that the beginning of this was not what either of us would have chosen. I am aware that you have never owed me anything, that everything you've built here you built yourself." A pause. "I am asking now with nothing attached to it, no arrangement, no debt, just the question." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had lit a fire in her room before he knew her worth, who had moved quietly to protect her before she'd asked, who had learned to laugh again, softly, rarely, but genuinely. Somewhere between the correspondence and the summer evenings and Charles's Latin lessons. "You're not a particularly easy man," she said. "No, you work before sunrise. You have strong opinions about tenant contracts. You once spent 40 minutes explaining drainage gradients to me as though it was interesting." "It is interesting, Damien." "Yes? Ask me again, properly." He rounded the desk, stood in front of her, not performing, just present, just himself, the most unguarded she had ever seen him. "Genevieve Sterling," he said, "will you allow me to court you?" She stood to meet him. "Yes," she said. "Obviously." The courtship lasted 4 months, which, by Whitmore standards, was practically extravagant. He brought her things, not gifts exactly, more like evidence. A land survey map of a northern parcel he thought she'd find interesting. A book on medieval estate law that she actually did find interesting, which delighted him more than he showed. A single late rose from the garden, left on her writing table with no note, which was more romantic than a sonnet would have been. She brought him things, too. Fixed the bookkeeping system he'd been tolerating for a decade. Rewrote the tenant agreement template so it was actually readable. Taught Charles to conjugate Latin verbs correctly, which Edmund said was a miracle. Small things, real things. The vocabulary of 2 people choosing each other daily, without drama. Edmund, home for Christmas, observed the situation for approximately 1 dinner before declaring, "It's about time," and reverting to his soup. Charles drew a new picture. The estate, the fields, 2 figures at the window this time. She put it on her wall. Lord Sterling made one final attempt in February. A letter, this time, addressed to Damien, not Genevieve. Carefully worded, invoking family honor, paternal rights, suggestions of impropriety in the living arrangement. The letter of a man who had consulted someone legal enough to use the right words but not skilled enough to make them stick. Damien read it at breakfast, handed it to Genevieve without comment. She read it, set it down. "He's found a solicitor, a poor one," Damien said. "There are no grounds. The original debt arrangement was fully documented. Your wage is recorded. Your position is legitimate." He picked up his coffee. "My solicitor will respond today. What will he say?" Damien looked at her over the rim of his cup. "That any further correspondence of this nature will be treated as harassment and pursued accordingly, and that Miss Sterling's affairs are no longer any concern of Lord Sterling's, in any capacity, effective immediately." She looked at the letter again. At her father's handwriting, still the same loops and flourishes he'd used when he signed her away in the middle of the night. She felt nothing, not nothing exactly, more like the specific piece of a wound that has fully closed. "Good," she said, and handed it back. They finished breakfast. The letter went to the solicitor. Lord Sterling was never heard from again. He proposed in April. In the Northfield, of all places, the parcel they'd been arguing companionably about for weeks, whether to expand the grain crop or add a second orchard. They were walking the boundary line, Genevieve making notes, Damien 3 paces ahead pointing at the soil drainage, when he stopped, turned around, looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something open and slightly terrified, which was the most honest thing about him. "I have been thinking," he said. "You're always thinking. About the orchard, Damien, and about the fact that I would like to argue about orchards with you for the rest of my life." She stopped writing. "That is the least romantic proposal in the history of the English language," she said. "I know." He reached into his coat pocket. A ring, simple, gold, a dark green stone that matched, she realized, the dress she'd worn to the assembly. "I had this made in January. I've been waiting for the right moment. I've concluded there is no right moment. There's just us. The field. The argument about the orchard. She looked at the ring, then at him. "We're planting the orchard," she said, obviously, "and I want the east field boundary redrawn. The current markers disadvantage the tenants." "I know. I've already spoken to the surveyor." "Of course you have." She held out her hand. He slid the ring on. Then he held her hand. Just held it, standing in the north field in April, the ground soft beneath them, the sky enormous and pale blue above. Neither of them were people who cried, neither of them spoke, but she leaned into him, just slightly, and he put his arm around her, and they stood there together in the field that was hers now. Not by arrangement, not by debt, not by anyone's transaction, by choice, by love, by everything they had quietly, stubbornly built. They married in June, small. Just the household, Edmund and Charles, Mrs. Holloway, who cried exactly once and denied it completely, Agnes, who made a cake that was objectively extraordinary, Peter the stable boy, who had by now read every book in the estate library and was working through a second pass. Charles walked her in, his idea, offered so seriously she hadn't been able to refuse. Edmund stood beside his father and looked, for the entire ceremony, like a man trying very hard not to be visibly moved and failing. 3 years later, the Whitmore estate was known for two things. The first, the most efficiently run tenant systems in the county, widely studied, occasionally copied, never quite replicated, because the thing that made it work wasn't the documents. It was the person who had written them. The second, the Duchess of Whitmore, who had opened a school. Not a charity. A school, real, structured, properly funded, with a curriculum Genevieve had designed herself. For the children of tenant farmers and village tradespeople and anyone else who wanted in. Peter, now 15, helped her teach the younger ones. The county had opinions, naturally. They always did. But the county's opinions had stopped mattering approximately 2 years ago, around the time Lady Ashford's own daughter enrolled in the school and came home saying it was the most interesting place she'd ever been. One evening, Genevieve sat at the desk that had been hers for 3 years now. Properly hers, the Duchess's desk, not the borrowed surface beside Damien's, and opened her journal. The same journal she'd kept since her mother died. The same habit. The same instinct to put language around the things too large to simply feel. She wrote, "My father measured my worth in debt and traded it away in the dark. He thought he was disposing of something. He was wrong. I know what I am now, not because someone told me. Because I built it. Here, in this house, in this county, with this man, with these boys, with every letter I drafted, and every tenant I fought for, and every child I taught to read. I am not what he sold. I am what I made. That is mine. Completely and permanently mine. No one can settle a debt with that." She closed the journal. Damien appeared in the doorway. Shirt sleeves, ink on his hand, the look of a man who had been working and decided, for once, to stop. "Come to bed," he said. She looked at him, this difficult, quiet, extraordinary man who had chosen her daily, without theatre, for 3 years. The school enrollment figures will be there tomorrow. The northern lease renewal. Genevieve. She closed the ledger, stood, crossed the room. He took her hand at the doorway, and they walked down the corridor together, past Charles's drawing still on the wall. 2 figures at the window, past the east wing door that stood open now, always open, no longer a sealed grief, but a remembered love. The house was warm. The house was full. The house was theirs. Thanks for watching. Genevieve started with nothing and built everything. Next week. A new woman, a new battle. A completely different ending you won't see coming. Drop your comments, like and subscribe to Duke Tales so you don't miss it.